I have the article here in front of me that is from Vox.com. And the reason that I chose this article for us to start really this podcast is because of how the middle class is, I guess, portrayed all throughout the country. Not only all throughout the country, but all throughout the world too. Because immigrants come to this country for that type of life because they don't have it in their country. Okay, so this article does point out very well how other people think about the middle class and what they want for themselves, right? So the article says, or the article's headline says, America's hollow middle class. Pre-pandemic, middle-class Americans modeled the belief that everything was fine. Unemployment was low, consumer confidence was high, the housing market had recovered. In 2019, 95% of people in households making over $100,000 a year reported they were doing okay financially, a 13% increase from 2013, but those positive economic indicators obscured a larger reality. 40 years ago, the term middle class referred to Americans who had successfully obtained a version of the American dream, a steady income from one or two earners, a home, and security for the future. It meant the ability to save and acquire assets. Now, it mostly means the ability to put your bills on autopay and service debt. The stability that once characterized the middle class, that made it such a coveted and inspirational echelon of American existence, had been hollowed out. Okay, and a lot of that does have to do with how Americans were spending money up to this point. Because if you ever listen to Dave Ramsey, he always has people calling in and asking for advice with their financial troubles. And some of these calls kind of, make me scratch my head, because this is people who are making $200,000, $300,000, $100,000 a year. And they seem to not be able to afford anything because they're in so much debt. They're overspending what they're bringing in each year. And, it makes me say, well, geez, I wish I was making $100,000 a year. If I wasn't doing that, I would be really good right now. But I'm not. The point is that if people had the, I guess you can say, the discipline that Dave Ramsey teaches, I really do believe that the economy will be a lot stronger. Now, I don't agree with everything that Dave Ramsey says, but in the larger part, about 90% of it, he's right. You do have to live beneath your means. You do have to live without debt. You don't have to have the very expensive car. You don't have to have a very expensive house. So there's different things that people call in and they talk about that I do agree with. So if Americans did live with those principles and that discipline, then the country as a whole and the economy will be a lot stronger. But it's not, because we're used to debt. We're pushed debt, down our throats. And the government reflects that, because we're at freaking $32 trillion right now. So, that made me think, and I asked Google, how many American families are in the middle class? Kind of like a number. As of September 2018, Pew reported that 52% of American adults were in the middle class. 52%. According to 2016 income figures. So they got into the IRS and, they are able to pull up all those numbers. So they have a very accurate number of how many people are in the middle class. There were 19% in the upper class and 29% in the lower class. According to Pew, the data suggests that the middle class has stabilized in size. So that's 52% of all workers, because that doesn't include children and elderly and everything like that. So I'm going to do this live because I didn't think about this, but let's see. How many people were employed in 2016? All right, so 150 million people were employed. Okay? Population ratio 59.7%, unemployment rate 4% in May. In May 2016, there were 151 million employed people among the 253 that made up the civilian non-institutional population. So 150 million people, right? 50% of that. That's 76 million Americans, right? So my point in all of this is that 76 million Americans are likely to have a mental breakdown once everything implodes. And of course, it doesn't include preppers, but let's just say that there's no preppers anywhere, not including me. 52%, about 78%, about 76 million Americans will go into some type of depression, anger, some mental issue once they see their assets evaporate, their house probably be taken away from them, losing their jobs, living in the streets, not having any food because they can't find any, and everything else that will go down in an economic collapse, because that's exactly what we would experience. So what are Americans going to do? What are we going to do? All right, as a population, as preppers, what are we going to do once people realize that the value of the dollar is not there anymore? We have hyperinflation, and everybody's running around trying to find food and water because they cannot find any at the store. It may not happen overnight, because that's kind of what it sounds like, how it sounds like I'm saying it, but that's not what I'm meaning. All right, I don't mean that this is going to happen overnight. Everyone will see things go on, and they're going to see the red flags, and then it will implode. I mean, we're seeing them right now, and they might be 3 to 4 years away, or 7 years away. So that is the reason why I say that now that we have timelines, we have to get prepared. Because in the past, preppers always said, one day in the future, we're going to have an economic collapse. We just never knew when. Now we have projections. It could be in the next 3 years, in the next 7 years. Can we get to $45 trillion without the US dollar collapsing? Probably. Nobody thought we were going to get 32. Can we get to 78? Probably. Nobody thought we were going to get to 32. So whether you have 3 years or 7 years, you have to make sure you're ready. The very first thing that the people in Venezuela were looking for was food, because everything just ran out. I've shown you the videos of people in Venezuela breaking into warehouses, in grocery stores, ransacking the place because they didn't have any food and they didn't have any money to pay for it. Everything was hyperinflating. It wasn't hyperinflated yet to where they're used to now. It was starting to get there. And then the people who have more of the lower class, really, in Venezuela, they had more of an attitude of, self-preservation. They're the ones that stole everything first. The middle class were the ones that had, more manners, and they didn't think that it was right what they were doing. Although in the back of their mind, we're thinking I should be doing the same, but they didn't, because they have manners. They had money in their bank account. They were waiting for things to kind of pass over and get back to normal, but they never did. And then eventually they were also the ones at the grocery stores begging for food from the government, or stealing any that they could from the stores. So you have to make sure right now, if you're in the middle class and you have, money to spend, I really do encourage you to spend it in preparedness, into getting your food, your water, your communications, your security, your medical, all right? It's starting all with your alliance, because that's going to tell you how much you're going to need of everything. But you really need to have a place. If you live in the suburbs, if you live in the major cities, you should really either move out or have a place out in the country with at the very least 10 acres of land, because it's going to give you enough land for you to have your garden and for you to have your farm animals, to have all the infrastructure that you need in place in order for you to have a prepper retreat and have somewhere to go. And especially if you have all the money for that right now. So I would really encourage you to take care of that in the next 3 years. You have plenty of time. 3 years is plenty of time for you to buy property out in the country to, have either a house built or have something already built that you're buying, and then put in a barn there, put in a chicken coop, put in, corrals, and put in all those things in place. And then having a plot of land ready as well, and having your seeds stocked up, and having, surface water running through your property all the time, and having a rain catchment system if it's legal in your state. And if it's not, you should really move out of that state. So that is the reason why you have to make sure that you are more, you have that sense of urgency in your preparedness. So I have a video here from Peter Schiff, and it's talking about the Fed and the dollar are at risk of collapse. But pay really close attention to this 2-minute video, because it's really going to show you how the economy and the Fed are intertwined, and if something happens to either one, they both collapse, pretty much. All right? So here's that video.
So if interest rates go up, we could see a stock market sell-off. But the Fed chairman insists easy money policies aren't blowing any bubbles in the stock market. But luckily, Powell says the Fed will continue its bond buying program anyway to push rates down until further notice. He's at a House hearing today. I asked Peter Schiff, chairman at Schiff Gold, if he had any thoughts on Powell's performance.
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts. In fact, I tweeted them all out. Powell is getting progressively more dovish every time he speaks, which I think is a necessity because the U.S. economy is in need of more artificial support every time he speaks. Because the only thing that the economy's got going for it is the Fed, because it's a phony economy. It's not real, and it's completely dependent on increasing levels of inflation. So the Fed keeps on printing money while pretending it has no effect on interest rates, no effect on asset prices, and claiming that the market doesn't even need its help. I mean, Powell actually said today that he doesn't even think the Fed's massive bond buying program is having any effect on interest rates. He thinks there's plenty of demand for U.S. Treasuries, and the Treasury doesn't even need the Fed, which, of course, if that were true, then why is the Fed buying all these bonds in the first place? The truth is that's the only thing standing between us and complete economic collapse is the Fed, but the only thing standing between the Fed and collapse is the value of the dollar. And, Powell today said that he doesn't think it matters how much money they print, that there's no longer a relationship between the supply of dollars and the value of those dollars. Well, the laws of supply and demand are still in effect. And if Powell keeps printing dollars, eventually there'll be no demand and the value, the price is going to collapse. And that's when it all hits the fan.
Right, so very important part of the video, or, very important video that I just showed you, because there were several things on there that were really important that I want to point out to you right now. And the first one was that he pointed out that the day that the bonds are no longer being bought by the Fed, pretty much, that's when we have our economic collapse. But that's not the only thing. We are printing so much money, and that's going to decrease the demand of the dollar. And that's also going to make it collapse. So we have two scenarios here. We're going to have to see which one happens first. Because it doesn't matter which one goes down first. They both are going to collapse, and they're both going to have the same effect. But the most important part of this is that Powell said that the relationship between printing money and inflation is no longer there. He's wrong, and he knows he's lying. Because history teaches that, and everywhere else that we had cases and examples of hyperinflation, every time those countries print infinite amount of money, that's when they have debt. When they have hyperinflation. Okay? So now, because of this, now that we talked about that, the next headline becomes very, very important, because for some people it's going to be great news. For the ones who understand how the economy works, is, we're scratching our head, we're shaking our head, and we're saying, might as well, it's going to collapse either way. We're just waiting for the day that it does.
The Man-Made Survival Show.